The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, you'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
Hello out there, Northamptonshire. It's been a hot minute since I was in this county. Well, this year I'm going to be concentrating a lot on Northamptonshire, in both North Northamptonshire and West Northamptonshire. I've never been to North Northamptonshire before. Well, not on TVI. I have been here before on a camping trip, and I came to this village to do said camping. Now behind me there you can see we have a quarry that provided a lot of the limestone you can find in the village we're about to walk around. This is the lovely Yarwell. Yarwell, Yarrow Spring. It's been a long time since I was in Northamptonshire, but here I am back in the county that's historically famous for shoemaking and leatherwork, and in more recent times, motorsport. We'll get into all of those at some point, but here in Yarwell today, leisure is on the agenda. Our first foray into North Northamptonshire sees us in a village that I actually know very well. A couple of years before the COVID pandemic sent the world into lockdown, I stayed here for a couple of nights at the incredible Yarwell Mill Country Park. That's the jewel in this one's crown, and when we get to it you'll see why. Before we do though, let's explain a bit about how Yarwell came to exist and how it got its name. There are several theories as to the latter. One idea links it to a spring where yarrow grows, and that's the most likely. Yarrow is a hardy perennial herb that grows across Britain. Another suggestion is that it comes from Old English elements meaning fish weir spring or stream, or possibly from whale meaning pool. We can say with some certainty it's linked to water, and that's no surprise. Yarwell sits beside the River Nene. Its early growth was shaped by its riverside position and by local woodland that formed part of the wider Rockingham Forest in medieval times. The forest did govern its development somewhat. Because it was primarily a royal hunting area, expansion was limited, and so the settlement remained small for centuries. It was so small at the time of Doomsday that it didn't even appear in the book. For a long time, Yarwell remained closely linked to the manor of Nassington, which is the next village to the south. In 1580 it had 39 houses, and by 1801 that number had barely increased. 58 families were recorded here at that time. There aren't many more today, but Yarwell is now mostly housing. The most important landmark that isn't residential is the Church of St Mary Magdalene. The village also has the Angel Inn, and it also once had a Methodist chapel, but that closed in the late 20th century. The Nene Valley Railway runs nearby, with Yarwell Junction Station marking the end of it. We won't see that in this video because it's not actually within the parish boundaries. What we will see is the country park, which is literally next door. Anchored by the super impressive Yarwell Mill, a building that's easily up there with the best in this village, the country park can offer you a wonderful riverside campsite that I can personally recommend. It's going to be great to go back and see it here. So let's walk. Before we get into the village itself, here's a piece on an old quarry which you can find away to the northwest. Yarwell was a long-established extraction site linked to the limestone geology of the Nene Valley. Limestone has been taken from this part of Northamptonshire since medieval times, and the stone was valued for things like building and lime burning. Yarwell's position near the river was ideal for it really, because boats could transport it away via the Nene. Quarrying in the region was at its organisational peak in the 18th and 19th centuries. Maps from that period show several quarry workings around both Yarwell and Old Fotheringhay nearby. Close by towns such as Peterborough needed the stone from this area. Quarrying methods would later change as machinery replaced hand tools. The old quarry at Yarwell saw phases of renewed activity, but it remained smaller than other major industrial sites elsewhere in the county. Its output served local needs rather than large commercial markets. As extraction slowed after 1900, the site began to take on a new role as a landscape of ecological and historical interest. Its uneven ground, exposed rock and abandoned workings created habitats for plants and wildlife typical of limestone environments. And so today the old quarry is valued not for its stone anymore, but instead for its ecology. Keep this in mind though, the quarry certainly helps to explain the appearance of Yarwell's older buildings, many of which use stone that likely came from here. Okay, so here we are then in Yarwell village, which is literally about not even a quarter of a mile up the road from where the old quarry is. Now, Yarwell is basically two roads. You've got the one that you can see there with the police camera van on it, by the way. Be careful if you're passing through. And the other one is the main street, which runs off to the right, and that runs all the way down to Yarwell Mill. Essentially what we're going to do to start off this walk is to go down that road to the right, and that will take us towards the mill and past virtually everything else that Yarwell's got. There is one thing though that is on this road, just beyond the police camera van, that is of note, and that would be Yarwell's pinfold. On the approach to the village's main street, there's a really good example of a pinfold. Check this one out, folks. I'm not sure I've ever seen one quite like this. As we know, these things were used for holding stray livestock until their owners paid a fine to collect them. It's not in use anymore, as you can tell, but Yarwell's Pinder kept this one in use for many centuries. Pinfolds were usually built of stone, and Yarwell's was no exception. Now, I bet you can't guess where the stone for this one came from, can you? Yep, that's right, just up the road at the old quarry. Now we're on the main street along which most of Yarwell lies. There are several historic buildings along here, including a former Wesleyan Methodist chapel built in 1840. It stands on the northern side of Main Street, set back behind what was once a shop called Yarwell Stores. The chapel was constructed using coarse limestone rubble, and I won't insult your intelligence, you already know where that came from. Soon after it was built in 1840, a cottage and a Sunday school were added at the southern end, linked to the chapel by a passageway. The passage also contained a separate doorway leading to a deep south gallery, which was installed during some mid-19th century alterations. The gallery gave access to an upper-level Sunday school room, which was later partitioned and no longer forms part of the chapel's interior. It continued in use into the 20th century, but regular worship ended between 25 and 30 years ago. The building has remained standing ever since and has retained its historic form. In short, it's still one of Yarwell's key 19th century structures. It's quite windy today. I don't know whether you guys have noticed that already on the camera, but there's certainly a breeze in the air. It's blowing me along. It's blowing me along the main street, quite frankly. And this is the main street, and very pretty and very nice it is too. I've been down here before, like I said, when I came to the campsite, which we'll get to eventually. That's looking towards where the pinfold is, where we've just come from. And then in this direction is the village hall in a moment. And there's also an old shop there on the left hand side. Can you see that? It's got a post box in its wall too. Now we come to the village hall, which has served local groups for many decades. Early references to the hall appear in parish newsletters and local directories from the late 20th century, which describe it as the main venue for local indoor gatherings. Alongside the pub and the church, which we'll see shortly, this has been a recognised and well-loved feature of the village for many years. Its construction predates the major housing changes of the 1960s and 1970s when newer properties were developed. The hall's importance is supported by the fact that Yarwell has lost several other public buildings over time. We already know about the chapel, but in addition, the post office closed in 1993 and the local school closed in the early 1960s. Today, Yarwell Parish Council use this for meetings, but there are a lot of other societies that take advantage of it. One of them is the Yarwell and Nassington Britannia Brass Band, which has existed for more than a century. The band rehearses weekly in this very building. The only pub in Yarwell is the Angel Inn, and it's one of the oldest surviving buildings here. According to the Yarwell Mill History Group, the inn dates to around 1673, and guess what? It's built of local limestone. There's a theme developing here, isn't there? The pub's official website describes it as a traditional 17th century free house and notes that it remains privately owned rather than tied to a brewery. Ownership in the early centuries is not fully documented, but trade directories from the Victorian period help us out here. They list Yarwell as having more than one public house, and the Angel Inn is believed to be one of those long-standing establishments. Its survival through the 20th century is notable, as many rural pubs in Northamptonshire closed during that period. The inn has kept several traditional features. The interior is divided into two small bar areas, with a games room at the rear containing a dartboard, a pool table, and a few other activities. The pub also has a long-running tradition of music nights and quiz nights. As if that wasn't enough, the inn is also known for hosting Woofstock. That's an annual summer music and beer event held in aid of retired greyhounds. It's become one of the pub's regular fixtures, developing alongside much older traditions over time. In recent years, the Angel Inn has also gained recognition for its cider. It usually offers around 8 ciders, making it a notable venue for drinkers of it in the region. So the Angel Inn might be old, but it's far younger than St Mary Magdalene's Church. This is the oldest surviving building in Yarwell, and it's Grade 2 listed to boot. It dates back to the 12th century, when many similar stone churches were built across Northamptonshire. The earliest parts of the building are again constructed from local limestone. The original layout included a nave, a chancel, and north and south aisles, which were supported by arcades typical of early Norman and early Gothic design. By the 13th century, the church had developed into a more complex building, including a west tower and features such as lancet and square-headed windows that survive today, albeit in a sort of altered form. The tower was later remodelled in the 18th century. One of the most important events in the church's history occurred in April 1782. Heavy snow and rain caused the coping on the northern side of the nave to fall onto the north aisle's roof. The weakened wall then collapsed. Because the south aisle was also in a poor condition, both were removed entirely. The arcades were blocked up, leaving the nave without aisles from that point onward. The event dramatically changed the appearance of the church, but the blocked arches are still visible today. The church's medieval form can still be traced in the surviving walls. The south elevation of the nave shows the outline of the 13th century arcade, even though the aisle itself no longer exists. The chancel too retains a 3-light east window typical of the late medieval period. In 1892, the church underwent a restoration involving the use of Collyweston slate on the roof. The work aimed to stabilise the structure after the earlier collapse, but also served to update the building for Victorian worship practices. The churchyard stopped being used for burials in the late 1880s. At that time, Yarwell and Nassington created a joint cemetery administered by members of both parish councils. We'll see that later as we leave the village. Now, religiously, there are plenty of important buildings around here in this bit of Northamptonshire. This is, important enough, this church, but it's certainly not the biggest and most important. You will see that tomorrow. You find, though, walking through Yarwell, there are plenty of things that refer to prebend or prebendal. That's all to do with Nassington, which is Yarwell's neighbour. Now we're at a set of houses where the old school once stood. Yarwell School was one of the most important buildings in the village, serving children until it closed in the 1960s. Now you'd never know it was here because its site was redeveloped into these 3 houses in 2003. The school would have taught basic subjects such as reading, writing, arithmetic and religious instruction. Rural schools of this size often had a single teacher and 1 main classroom. No architectural survey of Yarwell School survives to confirm that idea here, however. Mind you, its later conversion into these 3 houses suggests it was a building of a fairly modest size. For sure it would have had a solid construction, again, likely local limestone. Did you go to this school? Let me know about it in the comments if you did. Next door we have a veterinary surgery. This is a modern feature of the village and it's one of its most active services. It stands at 25 Mill Road and has been operating for more than 2 decades. This has provided veterinary care in the local area for over 20 years, and not just for those living in Yarwell. It was established in 2002 and describes itself today as a family practice with a focus on small animals. Although independent, Yarwell Vets has all the services you'd expect from such an establishment, like routine consultations, vaccinations, parasite control, screening, dental work and surgical operations. It offers dental x-rays on site, a relatively advanced facility for a small rural practice. The surgery also offers home visits. That's nothing new. You find it's a regular feature of rural veterinary work across the UK because it's important for elderly pet owners or animals that cannot travel very easily. Okay, so a moment ago, just before the school, you saw a sign for the Nene Valley Way footpath, which is what we're joining here. This is the Nene Valley Way footpath, and if you follow this, it'll take you down to Yarwell Mill Country Park. Now you can get via road. Basically, if you just keep walking up the road there, that'll take you to the entrance as well. But I'm going this way because I feel like it. I fancy it. So we'll see where it takes us. It should bring us out close to the reception building, which is part of the park and a very important bit too. You'll see in a minute why. This is the entrance to Yarwell Mill Country Park. Oh, how glad I am to be back. This is a lovely campsite which is based around the historic Yarwell Mill, a water mill with documented origins as early as the 16th century. Historic records show that the Earl of Westmoreland once owned the site of the mill in the 18th century and that a new mill house was built in 1730. Later, in the 19th century, the Jelly family ran the mill, adding a steam engine and a tall chimney to increase production. Milling continued until around 1933, after which the building was used for storage. Its industrial past explains the layout of the land here today, because there are water channels, stone structures and open areas that later became suitable for leisure use. The transition from a thriving industrial site to something more leisurely began in the 1990s. By the early 2000s, the mill and its surrounding land were being used informally for fishing and riverside recreation. Now, there's far, far more. The modern campsite took shape after new ownership in 2015. The new owners developed it into a formal holiday park with pitches for caravans, motorhomes and seasonal stays. The campsite sits beside the River Nene, using the gorgeous natural landscape. The park offers several walking routes that follow historic paths once used by mill workers and farmers. That's why I've been able to film this with no issues. We are actually on a public right-of-way that passes through the park. It's all legal here. Here's a bit more about the mill itself. As we already know, there's been a mill here since at least the mid-18th century, but the present building was constructed in 1839 to replace an earlier structure. Guess what? It's made of local limestone. It has a rectangular plan, 3 stories, and originally had a 7-window range on each floor. Although some openings were later altered, the main structure remains intact. It's well worthy of its Grade 2 listing status, first given to it in 1969. During the 19th century, the mill was operated by the Jelly family, well-known millers in the local area. Under their ownership, production increased massively, using a combination of water power and steam power. That was common in the later 1800s as mills modernised. In 1881, the miller was Henry Jelly, who also farmed 500 acres of land and employed 16 men and 9 boys. By 1914, the mill had changed hands. Then it was run by George Robinson. The last miller was Jack Starsmore, who continued until 1933. The mill was then used for grain storage until 1975. The interior machinery has been removed now, but cast iron columns still survive here. The mill wheel was originally located in the centre of the building, though it no longer survives. Today, the old mill has been converted into 6 apartments. So what happened to the mill house which the Earl of Westmoreland built in 1730? Well, I can answer that. Today it's used as the reception building for Yarwell Mill Country Park. It was constructed by a mason called John Dimbleby and a carpenter called Edward Orper. This is Yarwell Lock, officially known as number 33. It's one of the 38 locks on the River Nene and lies between Wansford Bridge to the north and Fotheringhay Bridge to the southwest, forming part of the main navigable route of the river. The River Nene has been used for transport for many centuries, but the lock system seen today developed gradually. Attempts to improve the upper river for navigation began in the 16th century, with more formal improvements made through a series of 18th century Acts of Parliament. Yarwell Lock forms part of that improved section, and it also belongs to the group of locks rebuilt or modernised during a 20th century reconstruction programme carried out by the Nene Catchment Board after the 1930 Land Drainage Act.
This is all exactly as I remember it a few years ago. If you find yourself at this point here, just on the other side of the lock, the Nene Way continues. It goes through there, and we walked down there when we were camping here. It takes you to Yarwell Junction on an old railway line, which is actually not in Yarwell parish. It's just over the border into another one, so we won't be seeing it in this episode, but of course we will cover that at some point in the future. What we will do though is make our way back through the campsite, over the lock. There's the big gate that accompanies the lock, by the way, sluice gate. And you may have heard it in the background, but one thing I've not shown you yet is the weir. There's a lot of rushing water here, and most of it is thanks to that weir there. And then up there's a splash pool as well, just in front of the mill. So there's no way back over the Nene apart from to go this way, so we'll retrace our steps, head out of the campsite up there and back into the village.
We have a couple of things left to see here. This is the playing field in the centre of the village. It served as the village's main outdoor sports area for a short spell, but the football pitch it once had hasn't been marked out since at least 2004. It remains a green open space that anyone can use, but organised sport is no longer a thing here. Nonetheless, it does have a small playground still, which is used on the regular by the children of Yarwell and visiting ones from the campsite, if they know it exists. There's a large patch of allotments not far away. I have to show you these, or else certain members of my viewership may start to feel aggrieved. You know who you are. Let's follow the path alongside these to reach the car and complete the circuit of Yarwell. Finally, we have the shared cemetery between Yarwell and Nassington, which stands on the road linking the two villages together. According to the Nassington and Yarwell Joint Burial Committee, the cemetery was established in the 1880s following the closure of the churchyards in both villages. The same record notes that a mortuary chapel once stood within the grounds, although no detailed description survives of that building today. The Joint Burial Committee managed all aspects of the cemetery, including maintenance, records and new plots. The shared approach was typical of small rural villages that lacked the resources to maintain separate burial grounds. By the early 21st century, the cemetery continued to be managed jointly, with inquiries directed through Nassington Parish Council. The site remains in use today, with new burials often recorded on the popular genealogy website Find a Grave. The walk through Yarwell has taken us past a sequence of sites that reveal the village's long and varied past. St Mary Magdalene's Church told us a story of medieval ambition and later repair. The Angel Inn's reputation for cider is another lovely touch. Yarwell Mill, where the old mill building, the old mill house and the campsite are, reveals a long industrial history. Throughout it all, we've been treated to a village that's been crafted from the very ground on which it sits, via the limestone under our feet. Yarwell is a great village. It's a great place to come and stay, and if you like camping, I thoroughly recommend the country park. Those long country walks you can go on from here are a thing of beauty. Bring yourself here sometime. You won't regret it.
Came down by the Nene where the water bends and glides, past the old quarry ground where limestone shaped these sides. Stepped on the mill road with a pack upon my back, heading for the campsite where the old mill keeps its track. Yarwell, you feel like a welcome I've been waiting for, with the mill house standing steady by the river's gentle roar. Yarwell, I'm finding something new in every view, and the path that leads me onward feels like it always knew. Main Street shows his chapel, built in limestone, rough and warm, and the Angel Inn still glowing with its cider pride and charm. I passed the old pinfold where the Pender once kept guard, stone walls shaped by quarry work, weathered but not scarred. Yarwell, you feel like a welcome I've been waiting for, with the mill house standing steady by the river's gentle roar. Yarwell, I'm finding something new in every view, and the path that leads me onward feels like it always knew. St. Mary Magdalene rises with its arches sealed in place, a building shaped by snowfall that once changed its very face. The village hall still echoes with the brass band's weekly tune, and the playing field lies open under a wide afternoon. Yarwell, you feel like a welcome I've been waiting for, with the mill house standing steady by the river's gentle roar. Yarwell, I'm finding something
hillside opens out where the mill once turned its wheel. A place rebuilt for wanderers with a calm I can feel. The lock stands firm nearby with its guillotine gate of steel. And the river keeps on moving with a rhythm strong and real. Yarwell, you feel like a welcome I've been waiting for, with the mill house standing steady by the river's gentle roar. Yarwell, I'm finding something new in every view, and the path that leads me onward feels like it always knew.
Hello folks, welcome back to Northamptonshire for episode number 2. Now yesterday we saw the beautiful parish and village of Yarwell. If you drive out of Yarwell to the south, you pass the cemetery. We saw that at the end of that episode. And as you come past the cemetery, you're then literally about a quarter of a mile away from this lovely place. And when you enter this village, you pass through what used to be the route of a railway line. It used to go sort of over there. There used to be a bridge there, but it's not there anymore. In that direction there was a viaduct as well. We won't see that because we can't get access to it, but we can definitely see the old station that this place used to have. That's down there. That will be our last stop in this place. There's plenty more to cover than just the station though. This is Nassington.
Nassington, Promontory Place Farm. Round 2 in North Northants brings us to the parish of Nassington, just to the south of Yarwell, where we were yesterday. The name Nassington comes from Old English. It means Promontory Place Farm or settlement. Let's explain what that means. It likely refers to its position near a raised area close to the River Nene, so we're not right on the valley floor here. Instead, we're in an elevated position above the river. That's the ideal place for a big village then, right? Well, Nassington is certainly one of those, and it's been here for a long old time. It was established in the Anglo-Saxon period, and in those days a hall was built and later taken over by King Canute. It was to become important in both royal and ecclesiastical history. Archaeology indicates that the area around Nassington was occupied long before even the Anglo-Saxons got here. Excavations at the Nassington homestead site have uncovered farming buildings dating back to around 140 AD, so this could well have been Roman at first. It all makes sense when you think about it. The River Nene would have provided water, transport routes and loads of fertile land, and that's why Nassington has thrived so much throughout several time periods. Nassington's manorial history is unusually well documented because of all this. After King Canute used the hall as one of his royal residences, the site passed into Norman-era control. In 1107, Henry I granted the hall and its land to Robert Blowett, the Bishop of Lincoln. That act was to endow a prebend, and thus it created what became known as the prebendal manor. It remained tied to the church for centuries, forming part of the Bishop of Lincoln's estate. Today, the prebendal manor is regarded as one of the best preserved medieval manor sites in the UK. Modern Nassington contains several other landmarks linked to its long history. The Prebendal Manor and Tithe Barn Museum are open to visitors on selected days, but this village also possesses a historic church, old stone houses and sites connected to a blue plaque heritage route. Aside from King Canute, another notable historical figure linked to Nassington is William of Nassington, a medieval writer known for his religious works in Middle English. His name appears in historical references connected to the village. Modern local historians, including contributors to the Nassington History Group, have also played a role in documenting this village's colourful and important past, but they are not widely known outside the region. Maybe I can put this one on the map a little more then. Nassington can be split into two distinct areas, the west and the east. The east is all based around Station Road, which connects Nassington to Yarwell. You are currently looking at a building on Station Road here, and it has a long and well recorded past. This is an old chapel which began its life in 1839. Originally it was known as the Congregational Zion Church. You can still see the date stone on a panel above the former entrance. When you stand in front of it, you instantly notice its construction style. The building is made of coursed rubble stone with freestone dressings, and it has a Welsh slate roof. Layout wise, it's a rectangular plan and has some lovely round-headed east windows. It was a simple but functional worship space in all. Inside it once had a gallery too. The chapel remained in religious use for many decades before eventually being converted into a house in the late 20th century. Next up we have the Queen's Head Inn, which is also on Station Road. This stands on a plot that's held an inn since at least the 17th century, and as such the oldest parts of the structure date from that period. Again, it's made of traditional coursed limestone typical of the 17th century. It has timber framing in parts and a tiled roof, which helps you understand how the inn would have looked when it first served travellers on the route through Nassington, which historically this was. The Queen's Head has been extended several times since it was built, creating extra rooms, storage areas and service spaces. It has constantly adapted to its needs. It's also one of the buildings on Nassington's Blue Plaque Heritage Route, and it deserves to be. Now we're standing outside the post office, a building that's held an important role in Nassington for many years. It's located at 49 Station Road, which is dead opposite the Queen's Head. In addition to being a post office, it also has a Londis store these days. The post office has been here for longer than the shop, according to records. Nassington Stores and Post Office was active at this address from at least 2007 and was the longest running business recorded here. Londis didn't come on the scene until 2010. The building has a more interesting history than you might think. This once housed Newton RE, a kitchen and bath fitting business. That tells us that although it's merely a shop now within a terraced row, it was flexible enough to support several trades at once.
Nassington's one of these villages that's got plenty of blue plaques and things on walls. Virtually every house along this street has one. Even the shop's got one. I don't know whether you saw it in the window. Let's have a look at this one. This one's Stoneleigh, number 50, and this says Mr. Taylor's Workshop, Arnold Locke, World War I veteran, artist and thespian. And across the road there's another one. In fact, there's two. There's one in the window there, but I won't be pointing my camera at that one because it's in someone's window. There is another one though at the end of the property here. Let's have a look at this. This is Penbury House, formerly The Boat, a River Wharf pub, Pear Tree Cottage until 1996. Let's see how many more of these we can find. I've passed at least 4 or 5 just between the old station and here.
Now we've reached the Black Horse on the corner of Station Road, Fotheringhay Road and Church Street. This was built in 1674, making it potentially slightly older than the Queen's Head. It made use once again of the widely available limestone in its construction. Essentially, the pub is laid out in an L-shaped plan, but there's a lean-to area at the rear. Additions have expanded the pub's capacity and altered its internal layout over time too. The ground floor rooms are open plan today, but the fireplaces and the stair turret remain as evidence of its earlier form. In terms of being open or closed, the Black Horse has had a checkered recent past. At present it's closed, and it has been since the end of 2019. It was then placed on the market for £550,000. It contained 3 customer areas and 2 beer gardens. On Church Street now, we're making our way over to the west. Between the 2 areas there's a primary school. Nassington Primary School serves children aged 4 to 11 and operates as a mixed establishment under the local authority of Northamptonshire. It has a capacity of 112 pupils and typically teaches around 70. It was last inspected by Ofsted in November 2023, and the school website proudly stated thereafter that it was judged as good. A more detailed history isn't available for this, but for sure it carries decades of educational history. Nassington Village Hall is also on Church Street, and this is one of the key stopping points for people exploring the Blue Plaque route, because visitors are encouraged to drop in at the Village Hall to look at the archives this holds. The Nassington History Group meets weekly in this hall and uses it as the base for storing and sharing historical material about the village and the surrounding area. This hall, therefore, is not only a local communal venue, but it's also a long-term home for local historical work. Without a doubt, the hall will have lots on both the church and the Prebendal Manor, both of which are coming up very shortly. And there's a bit of helpful information here on the parish notice board outside the village hall. It tells you a bit more about it. As you can see, the village hall was a Methodist schoolroom, and it was to do with the buy a brick scheme and the biscuit tin, whatever that's all about. I've got no idea. Now, as far as the Methodist schoolroom goes, that makes a bit of sense, because right next door you have this. A Methodist chapel, or a former Methodist chapel, and even that has got a blue plaque on it. Let's see what that one says as well. It's above the door. Let's see. The Methodist Chapel, Wesleyan Chapel, 1875 to 1980. There's a quote under that that says, "Do no harm, do good, and stay in love with God." And then under that it says the 1920 memorial. And then the bottom one says, "From deepest, darkest Peru." Well, we're a long way from South America here, but I'm pretty sure there's a connection there somehow. This is the Prebendal Manor, which is the oldest surviving dwelling in the county of Northamptonshire. Its history reaches back to the Anglo-Saxon period, and perhaps without realising it, you are standing here where a Saxon royal hall once stood. Written records tell us that King Canute stayed here in the early 11th century during one of his journeys. Said journey was noted in the Chronicle of Ramsey Abbey, and they have since been summarised by the manor's own historical account. Archaeology supports this idea. Channel 4's Time Team excavated part of the Prebendal Manor in 2003 and uncovered evidence of Canute's timber hall both inside and outside the later medieval structure. The site therefore held a major early building long before this stone manor house came along. You can imagine the original hall even if you can't see it today. It would have been timber framed with a central hearth, known to have remained in use until 1434, even after the stone house was built around it. The manor's early medieval history was tied to royal and church power. Between 1107 and 1116, Henry I granted the churches and lands of Nassington, Woodnewton, Tanser and Southwick to Robert Blowett, the Bishop of Lincoln, to be held as a prebend. Now, if you don't know, a prebend is a type of church income granted to a senior cleric. The grant here placed this estate under ecclesiastical control. The prebendaries who held it had wide authority. They could run manorial courts, exercise spiritual jurisdiction, and conduct visitations when the Bishop of Lincoln was absent. The prebendaries often played important roles in national affairs. There were 56 known prebendaries here, some of whom were royal clerks or foreign appointees approved by the Pope. One of the 56 was Nicholas Colnett, who was physician to Henry V during the Agincourt campaign. The first recorded prebendary was Ranulph de Nassington, and he was appointed in 1160. He may have repaired the existing Saxon hall before the major rebuilding that followed. When the house was replaced by the stone structure you see here, that was likely the work of William of Avalon. He was the nephew of St Hugh of Lincoln, and instead of demolishing the old hall outright, the builders he employed encased it with stone and dismantled it from the inside. As you walk around this site, you can see more than just the manor house. The estate includes a 15th century guest lodging, a 16th century dovecote, and a large 18th century tithe barn which now serves as a museum that's open selected days of the year. In short, the prebendal manor is a site shaped by kings, bishops, royal clerks and centuries of rebuilding. It's a place where a Saxon hall once stood, where a medieval stone house rose in its place, and where later buildings formed a complete historic complex. Over the road we have the Church of St Mary the Virgin and All Saints. This was a late Saxon foundation, and you can still see the evidence of that early period in the long and short coins in the tower and in parts of the nave and the south aisle today. Perhaps the best place to look for that evidence is the tower. Mostly it dates back to the 11th century, but the lower three stages are Saxon or perhaps very early Norman. We shouldn't be surprised by its age, given the Saxon hall stood dead opposite once upon a time. The site itself has likely been a place of worship long before the present stone church was built. Historians reckon this has been a known worship spot for over 1,000 years. Inside the church you find one of its most important early artefacts. That would be a 10th century Saxon cross shaft discovered during repairs in the 1880s. The carvings on it include interlaced patterns, a crucifixion scene and geometric designs. The cross originally stood outside and would have been around 10 feet high. The church gained new importance in the 12th century when the bishops of Lincoln established the prebend. Resultingly, this church was likely rebuilt or expanded at that time, or potentially in the early 13th century. There was another reason to rebuild it, however. A serious fire struck the church around the turn of the 13th century, and it was an event that led the Bishop of Lincoln to order the vicar to excommunicate those responsible for grievously molesting the church of Nassington. The damage was significant. As you walk through the churchyard and around the building today, you see a layout that developed over several centuries. It has that tall west tower, but also a nave, north and south aisles, clerestories, a south porch and a chancel. Inside it also has several preserved medieval wall paintings which survive in fragments and offer a glimpse into the devotional art of the Middle Ages. Historic England listed the church as Grade 1 in 1967.
So there you go folks, that's what all the prebendal stuff was about in Yarwell yesterday, all those houses that have prebend in their name. It's all linked to Nassington, and that's a lovely church as well, by the way. It really is nice to see it in the sunshine. Having said that, if you think that church is good, wait until you see the one I've got lined up for you tomorrow. Now that is a church.
Church Street bends to the right after the church itself, and it's not long before you reach Elsie's Vintage Tea Shop, stood at number 50. This operates inside a building that's been used as a shop for over 125 years. The tea shop was created as a 1950s themed venue designed to feel like stepping back into a mid-20th century living room. Accordingly, the owners furnished the interior with vintage items, patterned china and period decorations. Some of the antiques were even available for purchase. Elsie's has since become well known for its afternoon tea, which has to be pre-booked because everything here is made fresh on the day. A typical tea includes sandwiches, scones with jam and clotted cream, and a selection of small cakes. It's all served on that colourful vintage china, with knitted tea cosies on the teapots. That attention to detail has helped to define the shop's identity. So when can you sample the delights this offers? Well, not every day, unfortunately. It has limited opening hours, usually Thursdays to Saturdays. The restricted schedule allows the owners to prepare food in small batches, keeping the menu focused on homemade items. So far we've covered 2 pubs. Here's the site of a third. You're now standing at a site that once held one of Nassington's longest running. It was called the Three Horseshoes and it stood at number 64 Church Street. It closed in the 1980s and later became a private house. Despite serving Nassington for a very long time, a detailed history for this pub isn't widely available. For sure though, it had a loyal following, and its closure in the 1980s marked the end of a familiar meeting place for many Nassington residents. It was a building that once played a steady role in village life through its stone walls, traditional windows and its prominent position not far away from the church. The minimal sources that do survive still allow you to trace its existence, but the rest has been lost to the sands of time.
I didn't find much for that one, like I said, but there is a blue plaque in the window of that old pub, and it does have a few bits and bobs on it. One of the ones, the bullet points that's on there, says YouTube 1991. That's a reference to. Has it been on YouTube before, I wonder? Who knows? Maybe if you search for it you might find it. Anyway, that's the last sort of main landmark in the village now, apart from the old railway station. And to get to the old station we've got to make our way back to the east. We're going to go through a little housing area here, and then we're going to join a footpath that will take us pretty much to where the station is.
final stop on this walk is Nassington's old railway station. This opened in 1879 and sat on a railway line that ran between Wansford Line Junction at Seaton and Yarwell Junction at Wansford, giving Nassington direct access to the mainline route between Rugby and Peterborough. From 1883 to 1916, the station was also served by the Great Northern Railway, which ran trains between Leicester Belgrave Road and Peterborough North. That means for more than 30 years, you could have boarded trains operated by two different companies at the very same platforms. The station had 2 platforms and multiple waiting rooms, a fact that's backed up by the Nassington Blue Plaque route, which gives a vivid summary of the station's early years. The first passengers to ever use it travelled to King's Cliff and back on the opening day. After that day, rail travel became part of daily life here, until in 1912 there was a serious fire. During some renovation work, one of the waiting rooms caught alight, destroying one platform and the building attached to it. Luckily, the fire only temporarily closed the station. Passenger services continued for decades afterwards, but by the 1950s the line was considered no longer viable. It therefore closed to passengers in 1957, the same day as 2 other local stations at Wansford and Castor. It closed to goods traffic shortly afterwards. Even after the station closed, the line remained active. Trains continued to run because of the Naylor Benson ironstone quarry, located about 1 kilometre west of the station. Goods trains served the quarry until 1971, when the final load was taken out. The Blue Plaque route adds further detail about the station's later years. It explains that the road and river bridges connected with the line were demolished in the 1980s and 1990s because they were considered unsafe and too costly to repair. The river bridge was even offered to the Nene Valley Railway, but the cost of its restoration was judged to be too high, and so it was removed instead. And so today only the station house remains. It's the last physical reminder of a station that once carried passengers, goods and quarry stone.
Okay, we have completed the circuit of Nassington Village, and that's taken me just over an hour. That's a nice hour's stroll, to be honest with you. Didn't go at any major pace either, so if you bring yourself here you can have a nice hour's stroll too. Now, we haven't quite finished with this episode just yet, because to the south of everything you've so far seen there's the cricket club and a preschool, so those are going to be done separately. We'll head out there now and finish this one off.
There are 2 more things to cover, and they are both to the south of the village. Here we're at the cricket ground on Fotheringhay Road, looking at the building that houses Nassington Preschool. This modern establishment has been shaped greatly by one of Nassington's oldest sporting institutions. Although the earliest founding date of Nassington Cricket Club is not accurately known, it's been active for many years. They've played on this ground since at least the early 21st century, if not before. Cricket, as we know, is usually a male-dominated sport, but we live in times these days where sport is becoming more widely available to all. A great example of this gender-busting idea can be found here at this club. Nassington Cricket Club has female representation on its committee, including the chair. In addition, women and girls make up more than 50% of its playing membership, and that's part of the reason why they field all girls teams at under 11 and under 13 levels, as well as a senior women's side. When you stand at the cricket ground today, you're looking at a place that's been used for sport for many years. You see a pavilion that's been rebuilt and improved, a field that hosts junior and senior cricket matches, and a club that continually expands its teams and membership. And that's the end of the trip through Nassington, and as you look back over this route you realise just how much history you've passed in a short distance. The Prebendal Manor, the oldest dwelling in Northamptonshire where a Saxon hall once stood, is the standout feature. It's amazing how the medieval stone house has now been built around the earlier timber structure, and how later buildings like the Tithe Barn and the Dovecote form a complete historic complex. By the time you've finished, you've walked through more than 1,000 years of local history. Nassington is by far one of the best villages in Northamptonshire for those of you that like a wander through time. It's a big one, but it's packed with things to discover at every turn, and I hope through this visit the place is now better known to the wider world.
Fotheringay's proud ground, where a timber hall waited strong and renowned. Roman fields beneath me, old paths all around, and a dwelling that carried the weight of my crown. Stone and timber, shaping all I claim. Lincoln's clerics watching as I stake my name. Nassington, I stand in your ancient light, a king in a hall built firm and bright. Walls that guard the power I bear, a manor that answers my royal air. I saw the church across the track of earth, long and short quans marking its early birth. A cross shaft carved with scenes of worth, and a tower that watched every shift on this turf. Fire once struck, yet the place stayed strong. Clerics rebuilt, keeping faith lifelong. Nassington, I stand in your ancient light, a king in a hall built firm and bright. Walls that guard the power I bear, a manor that answers my royal air. Rising near the dovecote's frame, a tithe barn waiting as the seasons came. Prebendaries ruling in the bishop's name, while I walked the yard where my hall once came. Stone around timber, shaping all I see, a place that holds the mark of royalty. Nassington, I stand in your ancient light, built firm and bright. Walls that guard the power I bear, a manor that answers my royal air.
Hello folks, welcome back to Northamptonshire for round number 3. Now I've got a big smile on my face right now because I'm standing in one of the most historic spots anywhere in this country. Check this out. That there is a castle mound. Now we've seen plenty of those before. This one's quite big. Trust me, the camera doesn't do it justice. This thing's massive. Now, when there was a castle on this spot, quite a few notable historical events took place inside its walls. For a start, one of our kings was born in this castle, and another member of royalty was executed in it. Let's find out who they were. This is the parish of Fotheringhay. Fotheringhay, grazing island. Alright folks, next up in North Northamptonshire we've got the lovely little village of Fotheringhay, which has way more than you might think if you just look at the map. Essentially this place sits on one main street, but on that street there's a world of history. The name Fotheringhay comes from Old English. It combines the term fording, meaning grazing, with egg, meaning island. Putting the two together, this was once an island apparently, where livestock would graze. Fairly simple stuff. The first known written reference to Fotheringhay dates from 1060. By the time of the Norman period, it was already recognised as a settlement. Its early development was shaped by its position near the River Nene, which explains the island part of its name. The village later gained a bridge in 1573 on the orders of Elizabeth I, replacing an earlier ford, which presumably was used by herders bringing their animals to graze on the island. Even before those times, people were using the land around here. Archaeological evidence shows that the area had both prehistoric and Roman activity long before the medieval village formed. Ring ditches, barrows, flint tools, and even a rudimentary Roman village are known to have existed nearby. After the Domesday period, the manor passed through many hands. Edward III granted it to his son Edmund of Langley, the first Duke of York. This made Fotheringhay an important Yorkist seat.
Resultingly, the Dukes of York once lived here, and Richard III was once born in its castle. Yes indeed, Fotheringhay once had a castle. Today, the remains of it form the most notable landmark here. Only the motte of Fotheringhay Castle is visible now, but it was a vital part of a hugely important stronghold. Mary, Queen of Scots, spent her final months at the castle. Richard III would be born in it in 1452, and his parents, Richard Plantagenet and Cecily Neville, were later reburied in the parish church. Edward, the second Duke of York, killed at Agincourt, is also buried there. The church in question is St Mary and All Saints, and it has a tall perpendicular tower. Built in the 15th century as part of a collegiate foundation, it contains several Yorkist tombs and heraldry. Visitors often come to see the church just as much as the castle site. There can be no question, Fotheringhay looks like a nondescript village on maps, but it's far from being anything you should overlook. Important events took place in this tiny village, ones which seem a world away from anything you'd associate with rural Northants. There's no better place to start this one than at the mound that represents the spot where Fotheringhay Castle once stood. This is one of the most significant Norman fortifications anywhere in Northamptonshire. The mound is all that survives of a Motte and Bailey castle that once played a major role in both English and Scottish royal history. Its story stretches from the early 1100s to its demolition in the 17th century. The siting of this castle was no accident. The Nene formed a natural defence on one side, and the earthworks were shaped in such a way as to provide strength in the other directions. The earliest written reference to the castle appears in 1212, but we know it was older. In around 1100, Simon de Senlis, the Earl of Northampton, founded it. The motte you see here was originally topped by a timber keep, and the castle's bailey extended across the ground to the south between the mound and the River Nene. If you had been able to visit the castle in 1113, you would have found it in the possession of Prince David of Scotland, who later became King David I. He gained it through marriage to Maud, the widow of Simon de Senlis. Several Scottish princes then lived here. In the early 13th century, King John seized the castle during a period of political tension. In 1212, he demanded that David, Earl of Huntingdon, surrender Fotheringhay. In exchange, he asked for the safety of his son, who was held as a hostage. It briefly returned to its previous owners in 1215, but the years around 1220 brought further upheaval. Ranulph de Blondeville, the Earl of Chester, held the castle by 1220, and in 1221 it was captured for a short time by William de Fours during his rebellion against Henry III. It eventually became a favoured residence for the Dukes of York. Edmund of Langley, the first Duke of York and son of Edward III, is known to have improved the castle, turning it into a more modern residence rather than a simple defensive site. In 1452, the first major royal event took place here when Richard III, a future King of England, was born at the castle. There was to be another piece of well-known royal history at Fotheringhay 130 years later. More on that in a moment. By the early 17th century, the castle had fallen into neglect. Even though it had once been a major residence, it was allowed to decay. By 1635 it was already ruinous, and soon after it was dismantled almost entirely, with its stone reused elsewhere. So what was that other major piece of royal history? Well, take a look around you and you can see the castle's isolated position and once marshy surroundings would have made it suitable for holding a high-profile prisoner. That prisoner was Mary, Queen of Scots. It was here at Fotheringhay Castle where Mary was held during her final imprisonment. Her trial took place in its Great Hall, and her execution would follow in 1587. Her trial took place over 2 days after being accused of involvement in the Babington plot. The hall no longer exists, but this stone roughly marks the spot where the axe fell on her neck. Fun fact for you, Mary was not beheaded with a single strike. It took 3 attempts, so say historians, to completely detach her head from her body. Contemporary accounts describe the scaffold as being about 2 feet high, covered in black cloth and placed in the centre of the hall. Mary walked from her lodging within the castle to the hall, accompanied by officials and guards. After her death, her body was taken away for embalming. This commemorative stone was installed here after renewed interest in the castle's history. It was placed following archaeological work that mapped the castle's footprint. The stone bears a simple inscription noting that Mary was executed at Fotheringhay Castle. The stone has been photographed, sketched and described in guidebooks since its installation. It stands as one of the few physical markers of the castle's final role in Tudor politics. Although the castle was destroyed in 1627, this stone ensures the site of Mary's death remains identifiable.
It's quite exposed to the elements just there at the castle, and with it being really windy today, the force of the wind as I was trying to record that was quite something. So now we're on a footpath which leads from the castle mound into the main village, but we're not going straight down the main village street just yet, because you may have noticed on the Nene there's a bridge, Fotheringhay Bridge, and we definitely do need to talk about that.
Okay, so next up we have Fotheringhay Bridge. The bridge you see today dates from the early 18th century, but this river crossing has a long history that goes back to well before this bridge came along. In the Middle Ages, just before Mary Queen of Scots was brought here, you would not have found a bridge at all. Instead, travellers used a ford. Written records from the 16th century confirm that the ford was still in use during the reign of Elizabeth I. The fact this bridge exists at all is down to her. In 1573, Elizabeth ordered the construction of a timber bridge to replace the ford because the crossing had become unreliable during floods. However, the first bridge stood slightly upstream from this later one. The timber bridge did not last well. By the early 17th century, county records described it as decayed and dangerous. It was repaired several times and local landowners were required to contribute. Even so, the bridge continued to deteriorate. Travellers continued to complain about its condition, and the crossing soon became difficult for carts. By the late 1600s, the structure was judged beyond repair. It took another 20-odd years, but finally it was replaced. The bridge you cross today was built in 1722. It's built of local limestone which came from quarries near Oundle. It has 3 arches spanning the river, and the central arch is the widest, designed to allow boats to pass beneath. Once completed, it became the main route for traffic heading northeast towards Peterborough. It remained largely unchanged for more than 2 centuries, and only minor repairs were carried out to the parapets and the roadway. The road surface has since been improved, but the stone arches remain intact. From the centre of the bridge you can look upstream towards the castle mound and downstream towards the meadows that once formed part of the castle's outer grounds.
Well, it might be windy, but it's also quite sunny today, and you get that beautiful view of the Nene there next to the bridge. So yeah, hope you all enjoyed that. So now we have a village to see, and that means following the main road from one end of it basically to the other. So in front of us there you've got the lane that leads to the castle mound on the right, and then to the left you've got the main street, which when you turn onto it you've got this lovely thatched house on the left hand side and a big stone house on the right hand side, and both of them are magnificent buildings. Now this stone house has got a green plaque on it over here. Can you see? There's a blocked up doorway. I noticed this earlier. There's a blocked doorway, and then above that there's a plaque. Let's go and read what it says, shall we? It's something to do with Richard III, I think. Yeah, there we go. It goes on about Richard III and William of York, Anne Duchess of Exeter and Margaret Duchess of Burgundy, all born at Fotheringhay.
So from what we've already learned, you can't deny that Fotheringhay Castle is the most important landmark here, but St Mary and All Saints Church comes a close second. In fact, this is one of the most important late medieval churches in Northamptonshire. Its tall octagonal tower rises above the Nene Valley, and its form has dominated the local landscape since the 15th century. The building you see today was once part of a much larger complex that included a college of priests founded by the House of York. Records from the 12th century mention a parish church at Fotheringhay, and by the early 14th it was already linked with the local manor. The earlier church was replaced when the Yorkist dynasty decided to create a grander building that matched their status. The major change came in 1411, when Edmund of Langley's widow, Isabella of Castile, founded that college. Her son, Edward of Norwich, the second Duke of York, expanded the foundation. The college was intended to pray for the souls of the Yorkist family. The rebuilding of the church was completed in stages, the nave being first, followed by the Great West Tower. The tower's octagonal lantern is unusual for the region, by the way, and has long been a landmark for travellers. Of course, now this is just the church and the college no longer exists. It was dissolved in 1547, and the choir and the cloisters were stripped of valuables. The eastern arm of the church was demolished, leaving only the nave and the tower standing. The parish retained the nave as its church, but the rest of the complex disappeared. Stone from the demolished sections was reused in local buildings. The loss of the choir changed the proportions of the building, giving it the distinctive truncated form you see today. When you enter the church now, you see that wide nave with tall arcades and large perpendicular windows. The clerestory floods the interior with light. The octagonal tower rises above the west end, supported by strong buttresses. Inside the church are the tombs of several members of the Yorkist dynasty. Edward, the second Duke of York, was killed at Agincourt in 1415, and he was buried here. Richard III's parents, Richard Plantagenet and his wife Cecily Neville, were reburied here in 1476 after being moved from Pontefract. Now, the church isn't the only religious thing to talk about here. Just to the south of it is the former site of Fotheringhay Priory. It was a medieval religious house that shaped the early history of the village long before the great Yorkist College was founded. The priory belonged to the Cluniac order, and although nothing survives above ground today, its story is well recorded. It was founded in around 1107 by William Peveril, the powerful Norman landholder who we usually mention when we're in Derbyshire. He granted land at Fotheringhay to the Abbey of Cluny in France, and the monks established a small dependent priory here. The foundation charter listed lands, tithes and rights that supported the monks' daily life. The priory was never large. It usually housed only a handful of monks who followed the strict Cluniac rule. Because the priory belonged to Cluny, it was classed as an alien priory, meaning it was controlled from France. The monks who lived here answered directly to the mother house overseas, and that link caused problems during wars between England and France. During the conflicts, the Crown often seized the revenues of alien priories, including Fotheringhay. Records prove that, because here there were repeated seizures and restorations of the priory's income. By the early 15th century, the Crown had grown suspicious of foreign-controlled houses. In 1414, Henry V ordered the suppression of most alien priories. Fotheringhay Priory was dissolved at that time, and its lands and buildings were taken into royal hands. He then granted the former priory lands to Edmund of Langley's widow, Isabella of Castile, and it was that transfer that paved the way for the creation of the great Yorkist Collegiate Church. The old priory buildings were cleared, and the new college was built shortly afterwards.
Something else inside this church, people. You probably will remember this from the little Guess Where I Am short that I did a few weeks ago now. It's massive, huge, absolutely massive. Now inside here there's a few interesting artifacts in this cabinet. It's a glass cabinet which has got all sorts in it. So we've got some bits of masonry down there. There's an old pot there. There's a figure. Who might that be? Ah, well, it's a statue of Mary Queen of Scots. A gift from Michael and Juliet Wilson. That's appropriate, isn't it? A few other bits and bobs here. Pocket sundial there. Pieces of medieval rumbler bells worn by animals. Nuremberg jettons. Anglo-Gaelic jettons. Glass bead. All sorts of stuff in this cabinet.
Now, so far this one feels a bit like we've been stuck in the medieval period and the Middle Ages, but Fotheringhay does have a few things that are more modern. Here's one of them. This is the Falcon Inn. This inn once served travellers, estate workers and visitors to the village long after the castle had fallen into ruin. In the 17th century you would have seen an earlier building standing where this inn is today. Documentary evidence from the late 1600s mentions alehouses in Fotheringhay. One of those stood close to the church, and guess what? This was it. The earliest surviving parts of the present building date from that period, built in local limestone with timber framing in the interior. By the mid-18th century, the inn appeared in county records and road books as a recognised stopping place. Carriers travelling between Oundle and Peterborough used the inn as a resting point, and parish records mention meetings held here. During the 19th century, the inn expanded. Trade directories from the 1830s and 1840s list the Falcon as the principal inn in the village, run by successive landlords whose names appear in licensing records. The building gained additional rooms, stabling and a yard for its carts. By the late 20th century, the Falcon had become known for food and lodging rather than for serving travellers on the road. Guidebooks from the 1970s and 1980s simply described it as a notable historic inn in the Nene Valley. Effectively, it still is now. So where does the Falcon Inn get its name from? Well, it might not be immediately obvious, but it's all to do with the Yorkists. The Falcon appears on the heraldry associated with them usually, and so this further cements their connection to the village.
Okay, so between here and the end, it's pretty much all housing, barring the village hall, which is the next thing on our list. Let's go and find it.
Next we have the village hall, a building that served as the main public meeting place for the parish since the 20th century. Before then, records from the 1880s and 1890s mention meetings held in private houses or in rooms at the Falcon Inn. This hall was built in the early 1930s. County planning documents from the time describe a modest single-storey structure constructed in brick with a tiled roof and simple rectangular plan. It was completed with volunteer labour and small grants from local benefactors. During the Second World War, the hall was used for meetings linked to the Home Guard. You can just imagine a sort of Dad's Army operation going on in here, can't you? Don't panic, Mr. Manring, there's nothing like that now. In the 1960s and 1970s, the hall was the venue for annual fetes, harvest suppers and local elections. It was occasionally used as a polling station. In all, it was well used, and perhaps it's no surprise that by the 1980s it needed some repairs. Grants from Northamptonshire County Council helped fund improvements, and it gained upgraded lighting, new flooring and improved kitchen facilities. It was those changes which still allow it today to continue functioning as a practical venue for everyone in Fotheringhay. Next door to the village hall is the old school. Now, if you look at records from the 1820s and 1830s, you see that children back then were taught in cottages or in some sort of rented room near the church. The push for a proper school began in 1833. By the 1840s, Fotheringhay had secured funds and land for a national school, and this is the result. It was built in or just before 1850, and it was run by a single schoolmaster or schoolmistress. The building was constructed in local limestone, which, as we know, was widely available around here. It was capable of holding around 40 pupils. Attendance registers from the period show that numbers varied with the farming calendar, and children often missed lessons during harvest or lambing. In all, it was small, but it was orderly. The teacher often lived in a cottage nearby. By the 1920s and 1930s, county records show that the school struggled with falling enrolment. The building was sound, but the number of pupils rarely exceeded a dozen. Inspectors recommended closure several times. The Second World War brought a brief increase in numbers when evacuee children were placed in the area, but this rise did not last, and so it finally closed just after World War II. Children were then transferred to Oundle, and the building was sold and converted into a private house. And so we've come to the end of Fotheringhay, and you do struggle to look past that amazing castle mound. With me today, you've stood on the same ground where Richard III was born and where Mary, Queen of Scots, met her fate. Fotheringhay Bridge is equally as amazing, with a past that goes back to Elizabethan times. St Mary and All Saints Church, with its Yorkist tombs, and the site of Fotheringhay Priory do linger in your mind too as you make your way out of the village. Even the later landmarks tell a story of how the House of York helped to mould this Northamptonshire village into what it is today. It's not every day you get to visit a place like this, folks. Fotheringhay may be small, but the events of its past were nothing short of massive.
I stand within these walls where the Nene drifts by. A hall unshaped for princes, now the place where I wait. They say this mound held timber towers in an older age. Now only earth remains, and I breathe in my fate. I think of those who walked this ground long before my day. Roman tracks ring ditches, fields where cattle grazed. A bridge built for a queen lies just beyond my sight, and the tower of St. Mary and All Saints keeps its gaze. Yorkist bones lie near beneath the tall stone arcades. Richard's kin at rest where the lantern rises high. The priory is gone, its lungs long swept aside, yet its spirit lingers close as I prepare for goodbye. Fotheringhay, you cradle me in my final hour. Your river, your mound, your arches still endure. Fotheringhay, I meet my end within your walls, where the axe will fall, yet my resolve stays pure. Fotheringhay, the hall awaits with its dark cloth laid. Officials gather near, though my courage will not sway. Fotheringhay, though the scaffold stands so near. I walk with steady breath through this cold February day. Lord, receive my soul at mercy, guide me onward. Let peace surround this place and let my spirit rise in grace.
Hello folks, welcome back to Northamptonshire for another episode. Now in this episode, this park you can see behind me here has got one of the strangest things you may ever see in an English village. It's a statue. Now normally statues aren't things which are unusual, but this one is because of who it's of. It's of a Latvian man who made this place his home in his later years. This is Woodnewton.
Woodnewton, new farm in the wood. Round 4 in Northants this week brings us to the village of Woodnewton. This is going to be a fun one because it can be split into two areas. In the north you have the much newer part, which has only existed since the turn of the 20th century. The south has all the older stuff. It's the part which grew up first along one main street with practically everything of note on it. Woodnewton is a pretty village too, so we will be sure to see some lovely buildings on our walk around. The name Woodnewton is pretty simple to explain. It comes from new farm or new settlement with wood added because it lies in a wooded area. That wooded area was the Forest of Cliff, part of the larger Rockingham Forest. It began as a small agricultural settlement beside the Willow Brook. Its early layout formed around that simple main street with a back lane to the north. It initially expanded eastwards before contracting again by the mid-16th century. The wider area around Woodnewton was settled long before written records. The fertile land near the brook made it suitable for farming. Later, medieval development included mills at both ends of the village, with the eastern mill removed in the mid-18th century. In the Middle Ages there were two manors and one belonged to Fineshade Abbey. Both were later acquired by Sir Walter Mildmay and eventually passed to the Earls of Westmoreland. These owners influenced the village's layout, including its 18th century bridge over the nearby river. By the 19th century, Woodnewton supported market gardening. In particular, radishes were a product it was known for. The sheltered land south of the main street helped this trade grow, whilst the bridge aided their transport to local market towns. Throughout its existence, Woodnewton has had a church, and the current one is dedicated to St Mary. That stands at the western end of the village and is the most significant historic building here today. It forms part of the old prebendal estate of Nassington. Woodnewton also has a village hall, a pub, and a carved statue of Nikolai Polyakov, better known as Coco the Clown. Now there's an unusual landmark. The statue is a link to the annual Clown Fest, which is a fundraising event that helped pay for the village hall. Nikolai Polyakov is buried in the churchyard of St Mary's. Other local figures such as the Wades, the Lindsays and the Pridmores resided here, and they all appear in village records and street names. Let's have a walk around and see if we can spot them.
Okay, so our first job here was to find that statue which I mentioned in the intro. However, I just had a quick look around this park and around the village hall, and I can see no statue of the guy we were supposed to be talking about, Coco the Clown, or Nikolai Polyakov. I wonder whether it's been removed or relocated somewhere else. Whatever the case, it's not here in this park. Never mind. What we'll do is we will start this walk at this position here, but before we get going, I'm going to take you to the churchyard, which we'll see a bit later anyway, because I have had a quick Google and I found the guy's grave instead.
Polyakov was born in Latvia in 1900 and went on to become one of Britain's most beloved circus figures. After training in the Russian circus, he joined Bertram Mills Circus in the 1920s, where his gentle slapstick, expressive face and trademark oversized boots made him instantly recognisable. Coco wasn't a chaotic prankster, but a warm, humane clown whose humour came from empathy rather than mischief. During the Second World War, he entertained troops and children, becoming a symbol of resilience and joy. In 1970, Coco and his wife Valentina, who was known as Mama Coco, moved into a caravan in the garden of their daughter's bungalow, right here in Woodnewton. His daughter, whose name was Tamara, was also a circus performer, along with her husband, Ali. The pair had persuaded Coco to relocate after he was forced to leave his long-standing base near the Olympia Underground station. He became a familiar local figure, socialising in nearby pubs, sharing stories of his circus life and forming warm friendships with the neighbours. He died in Peterborough in 1974, and Woodnewton remains closely associated with his final years.
So the version of his name I've been using there, Polyakov, is the Russian version. But of course the guy was Latvian, and so he does have a slightly different looking surname on his gravestone. And here's what it is. Poliakovs. Ending in S, of course, because he was Latvian and most Latvian names end in S. And there he is, the guy himself, looking out over his grave and into the village of Woodnewton. Now we will be back to this point later. Here's the church, we'll be seeing that in all its glory. But for now, we're going to take ourselves back to the park where this video should have started with a statue. But of course, as we know, it couldn't.
When you look at the village hall in Woodnewton, you stand in front of a building shaped by more than a century of local effort and practical need. Much of what we know about this hall comes from the Woodnewton History Group, which has records and photographs spanning many years. Earlier meeting places in Woodnewton were small and often temporary. Before this existed, gatherings took place in rooms above pubs, in school buildings or in private houses. But by the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the village had changed. Farming patterns had altered and the old mills had declined, and as the village grew more stable, the need for a dedicated hall became stronger. You see this pattern in many rural places, but Woodnewton's case is really unusual. The first formal hall in Woodnewton stood on land linked to the playing field. Photographs in the archive show small timber buildings which did the job, but they were impractical. Whatever stood here by the time Coco arrived was too small and too worn. And so he was behind one of the most unusual fundraising efforts, helping inspire events that raised money for the new hall. Basically, without Coco, this hall wouldn't be here. Next up we have the allotments, and these will keep the fans happy today. They're a fairly sizable patch actually, so you lot can definitely have your fill in this place. Let's move on. Next we have to walk a fair distance to get to the church.
So as I said at the top of this video, aside from the village hall, this northern part of Woodnewton is generally speaking the newer bit. So what we're going to need to do now is to head for the church, and it'll be through some fairly modern housing. All the old stuff is on the main road between the church and the road towards Fotheringhay, which we'll walk along afterwards. So let's see what life's like here, shall we?
St Mary's Church has a story that stretches back nearly 1,000 years. No church was recorded in Woodnewton in the Domesday Book. The land was held by Reginald from Eustace, but the record did not mention a church building. However, by 1107 we know a church must have existed because Henry I created the prebend of Nassington and Woodnewton formed part of that ecclesiastical estate. This detail appears in the Woodnewton History Group's research. The oldest surviving parts of this church do give some clear evidence of the early period. The south chancel doorway with its semicircular arch and zigzag moulding belongs stylistically to the late 12th century. The south transept arch is also late 12th century. During the 13th century, the church expanded. A 3-bay south aisle was added to the nave and the chancel was rebuilt. The plan became cruciform, with a central area linking the nave, the chancel and the transepts. Moving forward in time, the church continued to change. The clerestory on the southern side of the nave dates from the 15th or 16th century, giving more light to the interior. The tower was rebuilt in the 16th century using some reused stone. By the 17th century, the church needed structural alteration. A porch was added, bearing the date 1662. The southern end of the south transept had become unstable, and in 1808 it was cut back and rebuilt in line with the aisle wall. When you walk around the exterior here, you notice its limestone rubble walls, freestone coins and ashlar dressings. Buttresses of different periods support the structure, including stepped buttresses on the tower and north wall. Architectural historians have long found St Mary's difficult to analyse because its building phases lie so close together in date. You have to, therefore, view it as a whole millennium of construction, repair and adaptation. Now we're heading for the site of an old corn mill not far away from the church. The Domesday Book recorded that the village had one water-powered mill back then. It was one of 14 mills in the Wilbrook 100, in which Woodnewton once lay. At that time, the village centre lay near the junction of what later became Main Street, Nassington Road, Pound Lane and Oundle Road. The mill was believed to stand just to the south of that junction, where the road to Southwick and Oundle crossed the Willow Brook. By the late 12th century, the manor of Woodnewton had passed into the hands of the Dengaine family. In 1195, Richard Dengaine held land in the village, and in the early 1200s he founded Fine Shade Priory. This is relevant to the mill, and here's why. His grandson Henry Dengaine granted part of the manor to the priory in 1260, including half of the mill at Woodnewton. It was given in Frankelmoine, which is a form of religious tenure, on the condition that the monks held masses for the family's souls. This meant the mill became partly monastic property. Later in 1344, Richard Knivett of Southwick donated the other half of the mill to the priory, giving the monks full control of the mill site and its income. At the dissolution of the monasteries in 1536, the priory's lands, including the mill, passed to the Crown. Soon after, the land was absorbed into the Apethorpe estate, first under the Mildmay family and later under Sir Francis Fane, who became the Earl of Westmoreland. Woodnewton by this time had two mills, one at the eastern end of the village and one at the western end. The later mill is the one that was located here, standing near the Brook's Bends, where the water's flow was strong enough to turn its wheel.
Well, fast flowing is certainly right, because you probably noticed just there as we walked over that little bridge, the water is rushing through past this house here. They are moving at a pace.
This here is the White Swan, and it's the only active pub in the village these days. There used to be at least one more, possibly even two, as we'll discover. The earliest known reference to an innkeeper at this site dates to 1790, when it was Thomas Henson. Probate records show that he died in 1799, and his widow Anne Henson continued running the inn until her death in 1807. Church records reveal that the Henson family had lived in Woodnewton since at least 1670. They were a very prominent local lot. Between 1810 and 1828, 2 further publicans appear in the records, but the most significant change came when the Barfield family took over. The Barfields were already well known in the area, with roots stretching back centuries, mainly in and around Rutland. Sarah Barfield was the first of the family recorded at the inn, followed by Samuel Barfield, who arrived from Kingscliff in 1826 with his wife Anne and their first child. Samuel ran both the inn and a wheelwright's business next door. He died in 1849, and Anne, along with their son Samuel Jr., continued running the White Swan until 1861. After this, William Fairmeadow became the licensee, and the inn stayed in the Fairmeadow family until the 1920s. Now, architecturally, the White Swan dates from the early 19th century. It was built at right angles to Main Street, with coursed rubble stone walls, freestone dressings, 2 stories and a cellar. There used to be a house that once stood beside it, but that was demolished sometime before 1968. In the 1990s, the pub gained a porch and a toilet extension. During the same decade, villagers opposed a planning application that would have ended its use as a public house, and the building remained open as a result. It still is today. So we know for a fact there was one other pub. It was called the Horse and Jockey, and it was somewhere here. The earliest confirmed reference to it comes from Piggott's Directory of 1830, which listed a beer house operated by John Pridmore. Later directories, including Piggott's 1841 and Kelly's 1854, named the premises as the Horse and Jockey. Census records help if you trace the people who ran it, and if you look through those, you see the Pridmore name mentioned loads of times. By the 1860s, the Horse and Jockey had passed to Thomas Wade. The Wades were another well-known Woodnewton family, and their involvement is perhaps just as important as the Pridmores, to be honest. The Horse and Jockey name is also relevant here. The building once had a yard behind it, likely used for stabling horses and storing carts. The name Horse and Jockey fits this function, as inns on rural routes often catered for riders and carriers. By the 1920s, the pub's fortunes declined. The rise of motor transport reduced the need for roadside inns, and the Horse and Jockey closed sometime between 1925 and 1930. After closure, the building was converted into a private house. Now, as I said earlier, there were possibly more pubs than those 2. Woodnewton had a series of smaller, often short-lived drinking houses that appear in things like trade directories, census returns and parish records. One of the earliest recorded beer cellars in the village was John Wade. His premises were never named as a pub, but the Woodnewton History Group notes that his house stood on Main Street somewhere, and it likely served as an informal drinking place. William Robinson was another man who was listed as a beer retailer in 1854. Now, his premises may have been on the eastern side of the village near the Old Mill Road, though no building survives with a confirmed link. There are also references to a short-lived beer house run by George Henson in 1861. When you look at Woodnewton today, you see no trace of these smaller drinking houses. Their buildings became cottages, workshops, or were even demolished. Why am I mentioning them specifically here though? Well, here's why. On the maps at the start of this video, a public house is marked somewhere here. There's no name given, but given what we've just learned there, could it possibly have been one of those? It seems likely, but there's no clear indication of which it may have been, if it was.
Okay, we are pretty much all the way around Woodnewton, just this little street to navigate that connects the 2 main ones together, and we'll be back to the start.
Woodnewton has taken us through many centuries of village history, and we've really uncovered, I think, today a fascinating story. How many villages do you know that have a statue of a Latvian clown in their village park? I only know of one, and that's here. Coco the Clown will be forever linked to this quiet corner of Northamptonshire, a village that grew around the Willow Brook, the main street and the back lane. The manorial story is just as gripping, from the Dengame family to Fineshade Priory and later the Mildmays and the Westmorlands. St Mary's Church stands out as the oldest surviving structure. The old corn mill showed us links to its industry, and the series of pubs gives us a great insight into the families that made this place tick. We now have a clear picture of Woodnewton's past, and it definitely doesn't clown around.
I wandered in boots muddy with the Willow Brook breezy. A circus soul finding rest among the trees. New streets in the north, old stone in the south, radishes once growing near every cottage mouth. A bridge shaped by Mildmays, Westmorland's passing through. And me, an old clown, smiling at a place that felt new. Woodnewton, you gave me laughter again, a village where a clown could stay. Woodnewton, where my tales found friends and my boots finally stopped their sway. St. Mary's watching over fields where mills once turned. A chancel arch with zigzags where old craft burned. The white swan glowing on Main Street's bend. Wade's and Pridmore's living close, neighbor to neighbor, friend beside friend. A hall built with cheer, with crowds that I drew, carved in the park now as if waving back at you. Woodnewton, you gave me laughter again, a village where a clown could stay. Woodnewton, where my tales found friends and my boots finally stopped their sway. Traveled long roads, tense, bright and grand, but here I found peace in this gentle land. Mama Coco near, Tamara close by, a caravan garden, a soft English sky. Woodnewton, where my tales found friends and my boots finally stopped their sway. Woodnewton.
Hello folks, welcome back to Northamptonshire for the last time this week. Now we've already had quite a bit of royal history this week, haven't we? When we were in Fotheringhay we were talking about Mary Queen of Scots and we were talking about Richard III. Well, in this village there's a palace which the royals knew very well. It's behind all these buildings over here and we can't get to it because it is a private residence these days and there's no chance of me getting there with the camera. Doesn't mean I can't cover it though. This is the parish of Apethorpe.
Apethorpe Apethorpe's outlying farm. Wrapping up the week in Northants, we have the tiny village of Apethorpe. Over the centuries, this one has appeared with many different spellings, including Apethorpe, Apethorpe, Apthorpe, Apthorpe, and Apthorpe. Trust me, they are spelled differently on what I've got written down here. They all mean the same thing, Apethorpe's outlying farm. This began as a small settlement in the early medieval period and lay within Rockingham Forest, an area used by Saxon kings for hunting. Its first firm written record appears in 1086, but archaeological evidence suggests an earlier occupation. A Roman villa with a courtyard, a hippocaust and some mosaic flooring was discovered here in 1859, just to the south of Apethorpe Palace, which is easily the biggest and most important landmark here today, by the way. In this video we'll see why. This parish absorbed the deserted nearby village of Hale, which declined after the Black Death. They were united by the 15th century, and from that time onwards the manor passed through several important owners. One was Sir Guy Woolston, an officer in the household of Edward IV, who acquired Apethorpe and Hale and built a large house here. In around 1550, the estate passed to Sir Walter Mildmay, the Chancellor of the Exchequer under Elizabeth I. His family held it until it passed to the Fanes, later Earls of Westmoreland. The first Earl rebuilt much of Apethorpe Palace under his reign. By the 18th century, the Fanes controlled almost all land in the parish, with only a few copyholds remaining. Aside from Apethorpe Palace, which is Grade 1 listed and one of the most important country houses in Northamptonshire, this tiny village has loads for us to admire. St Leonard's Church is a good place to start. That's mainly 14th and 15th century, with a 1621 chapel and a tower dated 1633. The village contains many limestone cottages too, some originally thatched. There's also a Grade 2 listed bridge over the Willow Brook. There's also a public house built in 1904, which replaced an earlier inn, and it remains a central feature of the village today. Several notable figures have lived in Apethorpe. Sir Walter Mildmay is obvious, but his son was also a resident. Sir Anthony Mildmay served as ambassador to Henry IV of France and is commemorated here by a major monument in St Leonard's Church. Then there's John Watts, a Stamford clockmaker who may have lived in the village himself, but for sure he made the church clock in 1704. This might only be a little village that you can walk through in minutes, but boy, does it have a lot. Let's see it. We start at St Leonard's Church. The building you see today stood mainly in the 14th and 15th centuries, but its roots reach further back into the medieval past. Archaeological evidence and surviving stonework pointed to an earlier church on the same site. The main rebuilding of the church happened in the early 15th century. For many years, people believed the date to be 1485, but dendrochronology later dated the roof timbers to 1422. Essentially then, this is a 600-year-old building. The medieval builders used coursed limestone with ashlar dressings, a typical material in this part of Northamptonshire. They created a plan with a nave, north and south aisles, a chancel and a south porch. There are notable tombs in here. One slab is that of Sir Richard Dalton, who died in 1442. Dalton once served as Lord of the Manor, and his half-sized armoured effigy stands as one of the strongest pieces of evidence for the earlier medieval church. In 1621, the South Chapel was built to house a major new monument. The chapel changed the shape of the church and added a striking architectural feature that draws a lot of attention. Inside it is one of the finest funerary monuments of the early 17th century. It commemorates Sir Anthony Mildmay and his wife Lady Grace Mildmay. Their effigies lay on a black and white tomb chest beneath a great domed canopy. The sculptor was probably Maximilian Colt, a Flemish artist who worked for English nobility and produced several major monuments. The chapel also contains a stained glass window dated 1621. It's unusual for its time because it uses figurative imagery. Its scenes include the fall, the crucifixion, the resurrection, and the Last Judgment. Scholars often link the imagery to the writings of Lady Grace Mildmay, whose religious meditations shape the themes of sin, redemption, and salvation. There can be no question the Mildmays are the main reason this church gets visitors. In 1633, the church gained its tower. It stands out because it lacks buttresses, rises in 3 stages, and carries a battlemented parapet. Above it, an octagonal spire completes its silhouette. Once, a weathercock probably crowned the spire. During the 18th century, further changes occurred inside the church. A marble font and a panel pulpit were added, both funded by local patrons. Above the high altar, coloured glass by John Rowell of High Wycombe brought new light into the chancel. Outside, the churchyard holds two important listed structures. One is a 14th century limestone ashlar cross, and the other is an 18th century chest tomb. Both carry Grade 2 listings for their historical value. The church itself received a Grade 1 listing on the 23rd of May 1967.
Well, rightly so, people. This is the main event in this church. This is why people come to see it. Because I've seen some canopied effigies in my time, but this one, I think, beats the lot. That is absolutely fabulous. It's big as well. I don't think the camera does it justice, but this thing's actually huge. Amazing. This church does have some other things to talk about. I mean, for example, the tablet you can see on the wall there is all about the Fanes, the Fane family. There's quite a bit there. And then if you go this way, down the church, on the wall, there's a war memorial. And then above it, there's what looks like a pub sign. That's because it is a pub sign for a pub that no longer exists. It was called the Westmoreland Arms, and it was within the grounds of the churchyard. It's now been demolished. So that's why the sign is in here, effectively. Let's head out of the church again and see what else awaits us in Apethorpe. The church is fantastic, but this place has got far more.
From the church, you can see the old manor house here in Apethorpe. This is the building which predated the much better known grand house in the village, Apethorpe Palace. More on that in a bit. Long before the stonework of either building rose here, the manor of Apethorpe had been granted by Henry III to Ralph Le Breton, though it returned to the crown the following year. That early record set the legal foundation for the estate that later developed here. Keep that in mind for later. Also close to the church we have a war memorial. This is a Grade 2 listed structure raised to honour the 4 men from this small parish who died in the First World War. The memorial stands on a circular grassed island at the meeting of Bridge Street and Main Street. It's a stone column set on a 4-stepped octagonal base topped by a reeded column, a collar and a Latin cross. The whole structure rises to 4 metres in height and measures roughly 3.8 metres across. The names of the fallen are carved into the sides of the plinth. From the memorial, you're only a couple of steps away from the old village stocks. These stocks, together with the whipping post beside them, date from the 17th century. They're made of oak with iron fittings, and originally they stood in a different part of the village. They were moved to this spot in the early 20th century. In their original position, the stocks would have stood in an open central location where offenders could be placed for hours at a time. Wasn't life cruel back then, eh? Measurements-wise, they're about 1.7 metres long and 0.7 metres high, with 6 leg holes cut into the timber. The whipping post rises to around 1.5 metres. Now, a limestone shelter with a collie western slate roof has been built specifically to house them. The shelter is open at the front, allowing the stocks to remain visible while still shielding the timber from weather damage. The shelter itself is now over a century old and has become part of the stocks' more modern history. we have the old school building here in Apethorpe. You're looking at a place that served local children for many decades. Although Apethorpe never had a large population, it maintained a village school from the 19th century onwards, and did so pretty well actually. The school was built in the mid-1800s using local limestone and Collyweston slate, the same materials seen throughout Apethorpe in fact. It served children of estate workers, farm labourers and domestic staff employed at Apethorpe Hall. The Mildmay and Fane families who owned the estate from the 16th to the 20th century often supported local institutions, and it's likely they contributed to the school's upkeep, just as they did with other village buildings. Even in the early 20th century, the school continued to function, though numbers were noticeably low. Census data from 1901 and 1911 recorded only around 130 residents in the village, meaning the school rarely had more than a handful of pupils. The school finally closed when new transport links made it practical to send children to larger schools in Nassington or King's Cliff. After closure, the building was converted into a private dwelling, and so it remains today. Although the old school closed, education continued in Apethorpe in a different form. From 1948, part of Apethorpe Palace was used as St John's School for Roman Catholic boys. It was an approved school for older pupils aged 15 to 17.
And opposite the old schoolhouse there, you have this building, which is the old village hall. Apethorpe doesn't have one of those anymore, apparently. I'll tell you what it does have though, and that would be a pub. And it's towards the end of the village, and to be fair, we're not a million miles away from the end of the village now. Strange, isn't it? But I did say we could be through this in 5 minutes. It is that small. So we need to carry on walking. The road bends to the right, and we'll go and find the pub.
Lastly on the walk we have the local pub. It's not as old as it looks. Its story begins in 1904 when it was first constructed as the King's Head. Its origins lie in the major changes made to Apethorpe after Leonard Brassey purchased the Westmoreland estate. Brassey invested heavily in the village and commissioned new houses and new estate buildings. One of them was a new public house, and this is the result. It was designed by H.F. Traylon, an architect from Stamford. Although commissioned in 1904, the King's Head was completed in around 1910, the same year that Brassey entered Parliament. It actually replaced an older inn, the Westmoreland Arms, which stood somewhere to the north of St Leonard's Church. The King's Head originally had a long lounge bar with service rooms behind and an open yard to the rear. A central chimney rose from the middle of the lounge, a feature which is still visible in early plans. By 1985, the internal layout had changed. The lounge had been divided into a sitting room, a kitchen and a wash house. Later proposals in the same year aimed to reopen the dining room and restore a more open plan. One thing that didn't change was the name until recently. In the early 21st century, the pub was renamed the Willow and Brook, taking its name from the Willow Brook that runs through the village. Despite refurbishment and attempts to broaden its appeal as a pub restaurant, trade declined. By 2023, the business closed due to insufficient custom. There were some rumours that it was to become a private house, but that never transpired. Instead, in 2025, it reopened under its original name, the King's Head. Long may it stay. So, there's one thing we haven't yet covered, and that is Apethorpe Palace. It's one of the most historically important houses in Northamptonshire. Its long story stretches from the medieval period to the present day, and every part of the building carries centuries of change. The earliest parts of the present building date from the late 15th century when Sir Guy Woolston owned the manor. He served in the household of Edward IV, and his wealth allowed him to build a substantial stone house here. In 1515, the manor was purchased by Henry Keble, the Lord Mayor of London. His family later sold it to Henry VIII, bringing Apethorpe directly into royal hands. When Henry VIII died, he left the estate to Princess Elizabeth, who of course later became Elizabeth I. In 1551, Elizabeth's brother Edward VI granted the estate to Sir Walter Mildmay in exchange for lands elsewhere. Mildmay, a senior statesman and founder of Emmanuel College, Cambridge, began reshaping the house. In 1562, he added a stone chimney piece engraved with his motto, which still survives inside. Elizabeth visited him here during her progresses in 1562, 1566 and 1587, dining in the very house you're seeing on your screens. After Mildmay's death, the estate passed to his son, Sir Anthony, and then to Anthony's daughter, Mary, and her husband, Sir Francis Fane, who later became the Earl of Westmoreland. Their inheritance marked the beginning of the most significant architectural phase in the palace's history. Between 1622 and 1624, Sir Francis Fane rebuilt the south and east ranges to create a suite of state apartments designed specifically for royal visits. These included the Long Gallery, which still contains some of the finest surviving Jacobean plasterwork and fireplaces in England. Apethorpe became a favourite residence for James I, who visited at least 13 times between 1566 and 1636, more than any other house in Northamptonshire. It was here in August 1614 that James first met George Villiers, the later Duke of Buckingham. Their meeting at Apethorpe had major political consequences, as Villiers soon became the king's most powerful favourite. During these royal stays, Ben Jonson wrote and staged court masques in the house, turning Apethorpe into a temporary centre of court entertainment. The palace continued to evolve after the Civil War. An orangery was added between 1718 and 1724, and in around 1740, the 7th Earl of Westmoreland commissioned further remodelling, likely by the architect Roger Morris. As such, it gained a more Palladian character. In the 19th century, the 11th Earl of Westmoreland employed Brian and Edward Browning to update the building again. Their work included repairs, internal alterations, and changes to the surrounding landscape. In the early 20th century, the estate was purchased by Lord Brassey, who brought in the architect Sir Reginald Blomfield to carry out further restoration. Blomfield's work included repairs to the courtyards and the reordering of some internal spaces. After the Second World War, the palace entered a long period of decline. Aside from its stint as St John's School, things went south dramatically. By the early 2000s, the building had deteriorated severely. In 2006, after years of neglect, a compulsory purchase order was issued and English Heritage took control of the site. A major programme of repairs began, stabilising the structure and restoring key rooms. In 2015, after a thorough restoration, the palace was sold to Jean-Christophe Issot von Pletten as a private residence. Under the terms of the sale, the house must open for pre-booked tours during July and August, which are managed by English Heritage. So what we have today is a house that's recognised as one of the finest Jacobean properties in England, with a rare survival of staterooms designed for royal use. English Heritage describes it as one of the country's most complete Jacobean interiors. In short, Apethorpe Palace matters. You're looking at a building that's hosted monarchs, witnessed political turning points, and underwent centuries of architectural change. Its royal connections, its staterooms, and its long sequence of alterations make it one of the most important houses anywhere in England.
So effectively we are through Apethorpe, but there is one more thing that caught my attention. When I got here, I parked myself outside the King's Head pub and I noticed this. I had no idea about this before I got here. What do we suppose this is? Now, it's made of concrete, it's not stone, so it's definitely not ancient. I think it's some sort of water tower with a battlemented top for some reason. What do you reckon? It's right next to the King's Head anyway. It's like literally next to the car park. I'm stood in the car park right now. And then of course, there's a phone box over the way as well, which is now a book exchange. It's got the defib machine in there too. But once you get beyond these two landmarks, Apethorpe just comes to an end and you're out into the countryside. And that's where we're about to go, past this big tower, whatever it is.
The walk through Apethorpe has taken us through a place shaped by many centuries of history. St Leonard's Church has offered the clearest link to its medieval past, and through the Mildmay Chapel and Dalton's tomb, you can see how important people shaped that. Apethorpe Palace is by far its grandest notable feature. Its Tudor ownership, Jacobean staterooms, royal visits, 18th century additions, 20th century decline, and modern restoration have formed a long, detailed timeline. Together, these places form a complete picture of Apethorpe's past, and what a picture you end up with. Apethorpe proves beyond any doubt that tiny villages should never be discounted, even if their larger neighbours attract far more attention. See you soon, all!
We walked these fields when the timber was new. A chapel was raised, built with purpose and view. A mark in stone where the arches stand. A carved old fragment on the north our wall, proof that faith lived here long before our call. We shaped the hall where monarchs came, left our motto cut in a chimney piece, still the same. We raise our voice again in the palace rooms where kings once dined, in the church where our likeness lies in stone. This place carries all we claimed as ours. Apethorpe, we stand within your walls once more. Elizabeth rode through our gates 3 times. Her footsteps still felt in the long gallery's lines. Sir Anthony rests beneath the dome design. A black and white tomb chest beneath the canopy guards his name. Grace beside him, her thoughts alive in colored glass. We shape the chapel where the light still falls, scenes of sin and salvation painted high on the wall. Where kings once dined, in the church where our likeness lies in stone. This place carries all we claimed as ours. Apethorpe, we stand within your walls once more. We watch the fanes take the reins in time, rebuilding wings for royal stay and royal design. Massed by Johnson filled the halls with sound. James found favor here, 13 visits crowned. Yet still our name lives in every arch and aisle. Though seasons changed and the palace slept, its stone kept every trace of the vows we kept. Apethorpe, we raise our voice again in the palace rooms where kings once dined, in the church where our likeness lies in stone. This place carries all we claimed as ours. Apethorpe, we stand within your
just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.